Welcome to memoQ Talks, where we talk to industry leaders about their experiences, lessons learned, and what works best across all areas of localization. Now here's your host.
Certain thrill and now dominate today's technological discussions when it comes to artificial intelligence, to machine learning, to all those different technologies that are used today to manipulate the world, to actually help us live better, but also to create some dystopic vision of the world that we will probably live in. And our privacy is being taken away from us, and people seem not to care that much. Will it be too late tomorrow? We'll see. My guest today is Balázs Kis. He's one of the founders of memoQ and its co-CEO. So Balázs's interests in the recent years have moved a lot towards humanities, towards the ethical aspects of technology. And he's very much interested in that and how our privacy can be protected and what's ethical, what's not about technology. And today we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about privacy and data. So Balázs, welcome to memoQ Talks.
Thank you, Chadomir. It's great to be here. It's a great honor to be here. Believe it or not, this is my first time on memoQ Talks, and I think it's a big thing. Thank you for the introduction. One of the things I just want to add to this is that I never really moved away from humanities. So my other degree is in linguistics, and I've been living among books all the time. All my life, I used to be a publisher, and it is true that lately I have taken up interest in topics such as I studied mediation, or I had to learn compliance and ethics, simply because, partly out of necessity, I was the first compliance officer at this company, which I'm no longer, as you could hear, but the interest is there, and I have become more sensitive to the ethical aspects of technology. That is true.
Awesome. And when you mentioned, I remember our conversation when you mentioned that you were in the publishing industry and everything. Maybe we can take a step back from the conversation now about the technology and everything and say something about memoQ and what makes memoQ very special. And that's, I think, the workflows in the publishing industry that you said are the most complex out there. And memoQ was practically based, its workflows were based upon those, right?
Yeah, actually, it's fantastic that you remember this, because there is a connection for sure. This was a family enterprise, so there was this tiny publishing company that I was running with my mom and dad, and from the mid 90s to the late 2000s, and we translated books about technology, books about computing. We had partners like Microsoft and other international publishers, and once we had a project I think that was a turning point, sometime in 1998, when there was this volume of 1,500 pages, and it's like mid-July, and the publisher, the publisher of the English original, comes to us and says that, I'm interested in buying up like half of your stock if this is on the shelves by mid-October. So how do you get this done in 3 months with the rigorous quality requirements that exist still exist in publishing? So that was the point where we started thinking about creating a workflow for translating in a short time by asking several translators to work on the project and come up with a workflow that will still allow us to provide for publication level quality. In publishing, you have a minimum of 3 quality assurance rounds. You have the so-called control editing when you compare to the original. But that's about translations. The second is the target language editing, and the third phase is proofreading. And you can actually repeat these as much as you want, because one of the things that you learn when you are in publishing is humility, and nothing you release will be free of errors. And that you can spend like 2 years polishing a text. In this case, we didn't have 2 years; we had 3 months. And we came up with a workflow. At first, we were running it using a word processor and email. That was it. And part of the process was preparing terminology, for instance, extracting and preparing terminology. And that had a great part in defining what later became memoQ. Back then, memoQ server, the product that now we know as memoQ TMS. So that's where it all started. That's true.
And how long ago was that? Just to put a date on it.
I'm talking about 1998.
1998.
And we created memoQ, the company, under a different name in 2005.
Okay.
So
that's
there were another 7 years until the actual decision and commitment to turn this into a software product.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story. And there's one more thing about you as well. You published, before this interview, you already told me you published many books on technology, and one of those was in 1996, right?
Yep.
About the Microsoft server, right?
That was a good story. But yeah, I have a background in technical writing, and that's something that I used to be an educator. It's an interesting story because I trained as an IT engineer. So I went to proper engineering school, Technical University here in Budapest. And but my first ever job was teaching system operators and system admins, much older than myself, on how to run a system based on a Windows Server, which was new at the time. Mm-hmm. And I had to realize that many of these people didn't speak English, couldn't read the English literature in a way that would be useful for them. That's different these days, but we are talking about the mid-90s. So we saw the opportunity to publish Hungarian language books for me. So the first ever Hungarian language book written on Windows Server was actually my job to do in a way or another. So that's what I did. But I also got training in technical writing in English as well. I published research papers, and for a while I also ran the technical documentation effort here in memoQ a couple of years ago.
Very, very important, I think, for the job and for what you created, like for memoQ, what it is today. So thank you for this all information. And speaking now about books, I will go into one of the books you mentioned during, I don't know when it was last time we spoke about it, but you mentioned this book
last
by
year
Kate
sometime, yeah.
Crawford. Yeah, something like maybe last year.
Yeah.
And this book is called Atlas of AI. And Atlas of AI is an interesting book because Kate Crawford mentions what it really is, what AI really is. It's not really just some immaterial algorithm. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot of lithium, cobalt, rare earth, and mines lying around, and this green gold, as they call it, which is used in all our cell phones, in our batteries, everywhere practically, on all our devices. And it appears that people today, AI is like the buzzword of the day. And there is a lot of hype about it, but a lot of good things that this technology actually is bringing. But there's this downside. So I would like you to tell us something about the, let's say, computational intensity of AI, what it is, how much it is impacting our environment as well, and where it is being abused.
Okay, why? Wow, this is an enormous topic. And I just like us to move a little back a little bit in
Let's
history,
do that,
because you said that AI is the hype of these days, but yeah, actually AI has been the hype of many generations. So I remember read I, Robot from Isaac Asimov. That's late 30s, early 40s.
True.
And guy is talking about positronic brains and artificial brains and electronic brains who converse with their human counterparts at perfect ease, and these admittedly fictitious machines perform activities that we still know to be unique to humans. So ever since we know that things can be automated, either by mechanical or electronic means, there is always this heightened expectation that it will eventually turn into something that is on par with human intelligence, maybe on par with human personhood. It becomes a kind of a person. There are also couple of dystopian stories that talk about the rebellion of machines. Oh, okay, everybody saw Matrix, for instance. So, and there is also, and sometimes makers of technologies use this kind of popular expectation to in a way mystify about the things they think they do, because that gives them more credibility, more creates more prestige and respect in society. Mm-hmm. Like, you are an engineer that creates an electronic brain. How cooler is that than working with bits and numbers and computers of limited capacity, where you have to perform all kinds of mathematical acrobatics to fit whatever you want to do in the limited resources. We are talking about like 1 to 4 keywords in computers in the 50s and the 60s. So taking up like much more than how big this room is. So it's this kind of expectation and this kind of mystification has always been around. Mm-hmm. Automatic machines ever since we know that it is possible to automate stuff. So we have to look at it in this context. So, and one of the best historic examples is I wonder if you heard about the ALPAC report. I guess you did.
Yeah, I heard about it. Yes.
Yeah,
and
it's.
Tell me more about it.
Yeah. Okay. I won't expand the abbreviation to you simply because I don't remember. It's not possible, but you can look it up. And maybe we should be able to include a few links in the when it gets published. We can include a few links in the bio or in the comments. But it's a report of a special committee created by the Department of Defense in the United States, of course, in 1966, about how previous attempts at creating useful machine translation were a failure. Mm-hmm. That's what the report is about. And that's interesting because people really believed that with the resources at hand, back at the time, they believed that mainly rule-based machine translation from Russian into English will be possible in a good quality, in a good readable quality, so that it can be used mainly for military intelligence, actually. And it simply didn't come true. And what decision makers coupled with this is obviously financial funding. So that's when funding was cut and machine translation moved from a high priority government project into the realm of private enterprise.
Mm-hmm. And what's changed in the past 50, 60 years?
Well, our computers grew in capacity and went down in size, obviously. So everybody's. So if you imagine your cell phone, and that's a computer far more powerful than anything that people in the 60s could even imagine. So that's what we have. We're able to write programs, and I'm talking about we, because my first computer was a ZX81 with 1 kilobyte of memory.
That sounds.
And I learned to write Z80 code. So that was a fairly advanced CPU for the time, actually. For that. And obviously, when you create a program, when you create automation, that's always also a task of economy, so because you have to fit in the resources that you have, while providing an output with reasonably acceptable performance. And these resources expanded exponentially. So when we have to write a program, we have a lot more memory, we have a lot more CPU power in terms of processing how many millions or billions of instructions per second. And that brought with them a lot of new techniques of creating software, a lot of new techniques of collaborating in creating software, creating automation solution at levels of complexity unheard of before. So that's kind of a synergy, and that's kind of a two processes that go hand in hand, and have been going in the last 40 years or so.
And all those resources that you mentioned, I mean, one cannot but wonder, are they being squandered? Like, are you using too much resources, even for tasks that do not require so much resources? And is that happening? Because we don't often think about how much we're having an impact on the environment as well. I mean, I was very surprised to learn how much our computers are actually, or servers that we use, let's say the Azure servers or Microsoft or whatever, how much they use the energy and how much they pollute.
Yeah,
so
let's say that is one of the things that we tend to forget, and that in order to operate any kind of automation, not just just the kind of technology that we now call artificial intelligence, but pretty much every computational activity like streaming a movie or some music or whatever, that runs on electricity. And that electricity has to come from somewhere, just like with electric cars. And producing the electricity has an environmental impact. And humanity has gradually become aware of the energy consumption of, let's face it, software. Because the way I write my software, the way I run my software, causes my computer to consume less or more electricity, and that with the number of computers, with the number of mobile devices going up steadily in the last couple of decades, it's becoming visible. It's becoming a problem, and people are becoming aware of that. Maybe because you are worried about the battery life of your mobile phone or your laptop. Now, operating systems have functionality to show you which applications consume the most energy, which is something I find useful, by the way.
Which one is that in your case? Do you know?
It's one of the infrastructure applications that my company uses, Microsoft Teams.
Okay.
When I'm in a video chat on Microsoft Teams, my computer is continuously raising the red flags that this app is consuming way too much energy. So that's one of those. But the good thing is that we are becoming aware of that, and circling back to AI, because we started from Kate Crawford's book, and that was one thing that we haven't said, that Kate Crawford, when she wrote that book, she was working for Microsoft Research. So she was not an unaffiliated, independent vigilante, so to speak. She was working for one of those companies that run one of the largest cloud infrastructures in the world. And she says, and we can also see that, if you want to make artificial intelligence, that has 4 components. It has the equipment, materials that you use to create a computing device that runs the AI. You need energy, electricity. You need data, and you need people. And the way these 4 play together defines what the AI can do, what it is useful for, and if it's good or bad for us. So
speaking about these 4 components, I was very much surprised to learn that there is actual people living in some third world countries normally who are involved in data labeling, and that's they're paid minimal wages, and it's incredible that something that we expect is done just by computers also involves people. Then there is data, and data which comes from some public sources, and data which comes from other sources that we don't even know and where they come from. And there's this also the idea of data sheets for data sets.
Yep.
This paper was, I looked it up on Google, and I found behind it were several researchers. One of those was Kate Crawford. Another one was Timnit Gebru. I think she used to work for Google, and she also started speaking up about the AI and the biases of AI, and she was forced practically to leave Google. Something that didn't happen to Kate, I think.
No, it didn't happen to Kate, but that's a whole space that has so many facets that you cannot grasp the whole of the complexity that they're dealing with at first. But what we are, so that's again, I want to step back a bit again. So why do we create applications that we think exhibit AI in a way or another? It's because we believe it creates value for someone. And I'm one of those idealistic people who believe that, every technology can be used for good or bad. Every technology can be used for the benefit of benefit of society, which is sounds like a bit too vague and a bit too big a word, but when you think of society as opposed to the lucky few who have the affinity, the proclivity to actually reach and work for accumulating power. It's not even about money. It's about power, feeling powerful. So, and I firmly believe that every technology can be used for the benefit of people. And I'm also circling back to a book that was written in the late 60s. That's it has a Latin title called Summa Technologiae.
Okay.
That's how we Hungarians pronounce Latin words. I know the English pronounce differently. I'm not gonna give it a try. Actually, Latin pronunciation is believed to be different back in the times of the Roman Empire, but let's not go into that.
Okay.
This is something I hope that this will prompt some of the viewers to actually look up original Latin pronunciation in the Roman Empire.
Yeah,
it's an interesting topic.
Whether it's a classical or not.
Yep. Yeah. But that's something that interests me, because one of the subjects, one of the foreign languages I learned in high school was Latin, and also one of our product managers here at memoQ has original training in ancient Latin and Greek.
Who is that?
That's Marianna.
Oh, really?
On the product team.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
We have like historians, we have Latin teachers, and we have all kinds of amazing people working on software.
And what is it about historians and linguists being so successful in
okay,
this?
we are rambling too much. Let me just get back to. I'm going to tell you just in a minute, but let's get back to this book I was mentioning. So it was written by Stanislav Lem, Polish sci-fi writer, basically, but he was also a thinker about the role of technology in human societies. And obviously he lived in a country in the Eastern Bloc and was influenced by the views that were going around back at the time. But still, Summa Technologiae is an exquisite monography on the history of technology. And in the introduction of that book, Stanislav Lem says that from the very ancient times, humans meant to create technology to extend the capabilities of their own bodies and minds. And that's how I think of technology. That was a very influential thought for me. That's how I think of technology, that is something, it's an artificial means to augment my capabilities, my physical capabilities, like a car or a bike or a plane to get me from A to B, or my mental capabilities, remembering things, just getting a notification from my phone to come to this room because the podcast recording is starting. I didn't have to remember that, my phone did. And that also goes for organizations and groups of people. So think of all the complicated, complex technologies that manufacturing firms use. They don't have to be built on computers. It can be built on any kind of technology. It's there to enhance the capabilities of a group of people to create something, to create value that they wouldn't be able to without the technology.
That's where I want to ask you. There are two questions that just popped to my mind.
Yeah.
One is where memoQ is using this new technology, AI or machine learning or whatever other technology, statistical analysis, where it uses that. And another one is, let's first focus on this one.
Yeah, interesting. When I was preparing for this, I saw one of the questions in here where you were asking what are the best known applications of artificial intelligence in translation software, and the obvious answer is machine translation, because machine translation is built on neural networks these days, and that's the obvious piece of artificial intelligence. But basically, what these means of artificial intelligence do, these pieces of artificial intelligence do, is anticipate choices, create answers to complex questions. Some call artificial intelligence prediction machines, because they extrapolate further data from data that was already made known to them. And pretty much anything where you can ask a question and get an answer, and you have sufficiently structured data, you can create a neural network or a deep learning network and have your computers approximate an answer. And so you can use it just about for anything, but that's one of the points that you can do. The fact that you can do something doesn't mean that you should do that. So if we go back to memoQ, so we get back to Earth and with both feet on the ground. memoQ is interesting. It doesn't incorporate a lot of artificial intelligence. So viewers probably know that memoQ uses machine translation through external partners. A lot of them. So there's an enormous choice of machine translation plugins that you can use to connect the best known machine translation and best known professional machine translation providers to memoQ. But memoQ itself doesn't do a whole lot. One of my favorite features or pieces of technology in memoQ is the memoQ. The memoQ is the technology that gives you predictive typing. That means that it will, based on the source text and based on the target text that you inputted previously, it will predict the next 2 or 3 words that you probably wanted to write. Mm-hmm. And this has been in memoQ for 8 years, something like that. I'm really bad at dates, but that's something like that. And it's from before the time of neural machine translation. Some say that the breakthrough in neural machine translation happened when it became publicly accessible and marketable. That was sometime around 2016. Mm-hmm. And memoQ's memoQ technology is from the time before that, and it uses a very simple statistical translation method, which may seem like simplistic, may seem not advanced enough. Mm-hmm. But it does the job beautifully. I translate from when I translate from English into Hungarian or vice versa, and it works pretty well. Most of the time, sometimes it feels it's a bit hidden in memoQ, but that's the publicity part of this podcast. You should give it a try because it works beautifully. And that's one of the points I'm trying to make here. That was also that I went to this course about Unix systems back at university in the early 90s, where the mantra was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we took it really seriously, and we were always researching. And what we learned there was to research existing solutions and best practices before inventing something that has already been invented 1,000 times over. Mm-hmm. And this is the case. For me, at least, this is the case with all kinds of technology. So why would I want to throw a neural network on a problem that is beautifully solved by outdated, if you will, approach of statistical machine translation? Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't have to give you... The big difference between statistical machine translation and neural machine translation. The neural machine translation is the approach that connects machine translation and translation itself to what we generally perceive as AI. Mm-hmm. Because to my experience, AI became synonymous to a neural network or deep learning network trained on a whole lot of data and used it, like I said, to predict answers, to approximate answers to questions that can be deduced from data. And that's when you begin to think about energy consumption. There's another article where we learned that training a neural network is usually done by using thousands of processor cores normally found in graphics processors, graphics cards. This is why when neuro-machine translation and this latest tendency to use neural networks became popular, that's when graphics cards became in short supply. Because everybody wanted graphics processor, but not to create images, not for imaging purposes, but to train neural networks. So thousands of processor cores, a lot of time, and this consumes a lot of energy. And it has a carbon footprint. Especially if you get your processing power from a data center where you don't know where the energy is coming from. Not every data center will let you will audit their energy sources. Not everybody is disclosing the source of their energy, but for instance, we just subscribe to an HR software system that runs on the cloud, of course, but doesn't run on the cloud these days. And the provider there has a certificate that their the data centers that they use are running on 100% renewable energy. But that's very rare. I only know a handful of data centers that actually disclose this about themselves. And we can read all kinds of pledges from large cloud providers to transition gradually to renewable energy, but most of the time you simply don't know. And when you don't know where the energy is coming from, and you task the system running there with a task of high energy consumption, that could be a concern. And training a neural network to do what the Muse does could take an hour or two, an 8 to 16,000 processor cores, maybe just 4,000. But the statistical model we uses an ordinary Intel CPU, because memoQ is running on Windows infrastructures. Even when you use it from the cloud, you know that there's an Azure machine in the background, somewhere beneath. And it takes like 20 seconds to 2 minutes on a normal CPU. And it does the job. So why would I want to consume 1,000 times more energy to get the same result?
That's a good question. Why don't people do that?
Because it's easy. What happens with, and again, I like taking steps back. You see, it's like that. But we talk about neural networks, right?
Yeah.
And that creates a perception that it's somehow a model of at least parts of the human brain, right? But yes. It is not.
Of course.
It is a method. And again, I'm encouraging our viewers to read up on that, neural networks. You will learn, even from Wikipedia, that it's a mathematical construct conceived in 1942, so it's not even new. That exhibits some of the characteristics also in biological neurons and their connections. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't meant to be a model of the human brain, and still isn't. So it's I think it helps if the general public somehow learns to disconnect these things, that it's man-made technology. It wasn't meant originally to model the human brain. It's not a model of a human brain. It doesn't have the prospect of reaching the same agency and the same capacity and the same kind of intelligence as a human brain. I'm not saying that there is no singularity in the future. Mm-hmm. Singularity means the ascent of artificial intelligence that is equivalent or superior to human capacity in every aspect. But it won't come from these technologies.
There is one beautiful thing that I heard, this comparison that you said, this neural network, and it's not the brain, it's not the human brain,
it isn't.
It's not even, we don't even know what brain is like practically. So we're trying to simulate something.
We know a lot.
We know a lot, but we're not going that way with this neural technology that we call it. Just like when we were building an airplane, we just saw how birds fly, but the airplane doesn't fly like birds. We just found a different way to fly. So maybe that comparison might be a good idea. Like maybe we'll end up somewhere completely different with these technologically neural networks than what our brain can do. And I liked one thing that you mentioned before this conversation. It was about the black box. Like that, these neural networks are practically a black box. We don't know how they work. What is it like about it that we don't know?
We know and we don't. I'm not an expert on the mathematics of neural networks. I was taught about this. Actually, that was something I went to a course on that in university in 1992. So the mathematics that we used to run these was known to mankind decades ago. But I'm not an expert here. So I wouldn't be able to give you an expert answer. But what we know basically is that it is impossible to debug a neural network. What you can do is change the training data, change the input stimulus, but that's basically the definition of a black box. You control the inputs. And you can change some of the parameters because there are layers to it, levels to it, but you cannot control its workings to the granularity of manipulating the answers as such. So what you can do is change the input and observe the output and make predictions of that. But like I said, I'm not an expert here. I don't see it particularly as a problem. Sometimes there are things to overcome. That's from the realm of machine translation people face two distinct issues when dealing with neural models. One of them was the limited alphabet. So a symbol set of a neural machine translation engine is limited at somewhere at 100,000. Now, if you try to represent every word of a language with a different symbol for a neural network, you will run out of space. Especially in Hungarian, because Hungarian has like 2 to 4 billion different word forms because of the excessive suffixing. German is a similar situation because of excessive compounding. And but these people were clever linguists, and there are ways around it. It's simply that the unit is not a word, but a morpheme, or even you go further down, and you can make beautiful things up. But that's one of the issues. So that's one of the limitations that they faced. The other, when you cannot directly influence or manipulate the input, in translation technology, we face it when we want to achieve something simple, like changing a term, changing the terminology use in a translation by. It's a natural question. Why can't I just choose a different term base to go with my machine translation without retraining the machine translation engine? That's difficult, and that takes a lot of pre-processing, a lot of post-processing of the translation results. So, but memoQ has another beautiful feature called the match batch that can be I'm not sure if we apply that, but that we apply that to translation memory hits. And tell me if you want me to define this, because obviously not all our viewers are translation experts. So a translation memory is a special kind of technology that's basically a database storing previous translation. A sentence in the source language along with its translation. And these databases, by the way, came to existence as a side effect of the ALPAC report that I mentioned previously. Because at the same time, because this committee evaluating the state of the art in machine translation in 1964-65 didn't just say that, okay, machine translation is useless, forget it. They were also researching alternative technologies that could be used to speed up translation without having to implement fully automatic machine translation. And that's where the concept of computer-assisted translation, these days known as CAT, came to be. Especially there was and that's I think in Appendix 12 of the ALPAC report, but we will hopefully include a link to that in the video, and viewers can read up on them. Speaks of an experiment in Mannheim, Germany, run under the umbrella of the U.S. Armed Forces that were stationed there at the time. And it was about translating scientific articles. And they had a database of previous translations on the word level or an expression level. I don't even remember. It's there in the article. And what they did, they fetched the previous translations from the database. And whatever wasn't in the database, it was dotted. They got a printout of that, and that was dotted out, and translators had to scribble and complete that. And that's where it all started. Very, very few people know that or aware of that. But basically, modern translation technology is still built around, decreasingly so, but still built around translation memories, which are databases of previous translations. So, if you have translated something previously, you don't have to translate it again. And even when whatever you need to translate today is not exactly the same as the thing that was translated before, the lookup mechanism of the database is able to detect similar sentences, similar passages, and give you a hit. And say how confident it is, how similar it is to the previous source text, and that's when you get a translation memory match rate of whatever 80%, 95%, 100%, 101%. 101% means that not only the sentence is the same, but its context too.
Yeah,
whatever is around it. Yeah, and when you translate using a translation memory, you continuously need to use the previous translations, and the minimum you need to do is adjust the translation that the translations. This is what I like, that it comes with a can. It's said, and it won't always be adequate or suitable for the job that you are doing. So you need to adjust the translation that you got from the database. And many times it means that you need to replace a term or two. And another thing that's in memoQ is that you can have term bases. Last series of term bases that are databases of terms instead of previous translations. And if you have a term base along with the translation memory, and there's the term, and it has the term you need, memoQ is able to automatically update your translation so that batch it, so the most current term is used.
So that's the match batch.
Yep, that's called match batch. Yeah. So that's something that is also comes way before the neural machine translation era, and it does the job beautifully. Again, why would you send the whole sentence to machine translation, a machine translation engine, if you have it in the database and there's a very easy matching algorithm that can update your sentence to be pretty much perfect?
Speaking about translation memories now, do you want to tell us something about this new translation memory that we had the project name of New Generation Translation Memory.
Now it's called TM Plus.
TM Plus now, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean to turn this into a product promo, but basically what we are realizing that there are some segments, business areas in this world that will still require and will heavily rely on human translation. That's what we call the premium translation segment, and they won't, because they will continuously require human translation and human involvement in the linguistic process of translation. They will need the translation memories, and these companies usually also have huge amounts of data. So one of our focal points is that one of our focus points that we are continuously working on is scalability, and what we are trying to achieve using TM Plus is to have have very large amounts of data handled with maximum efficiency. And that's what the TM Plus is aiming to do. Bring it up, bring the accessibility and the performance of the TM translation memory technology to the next level.
That means practically whoever, like big clients that have a lot of segments in their translation memory, they can retrieve them faster, right?
Yep, basically, and have less problems when they need to store a huge amount of translation units. That's what things in the translation memories are called, because wherever and whenever you have, especially a specialized database, it will have limits. And that's one of the beautiful things in computing these days, that you create something, you size up something to be able to hold a certain amount of things 10 years ago or something, and you say that, it should be enough. It should be that there's not going to be so much data that would fill it up, and then sooner rather than later it will hit a limit. People will, so that there's no, when you create software, there's no way how your customers will use it. You don't, that's one of the things that you don't control. And they will use it up. They will reach the limit. They will push it to the limit and beyond it, and again and again. And if you are a sensible software company, you have to be able to respond to that.
That's a good answer.
So yeah, remember that Bill Gates said in 1994, 1995 that no, it was earlier, that 640 kilobytes should be enough for everyone. No, that was something very, very early 90s. Where are we now?
That's
I mean, my phone has 8 gigabytes.
Yeah.
So it's like,
that's incredible. Now, I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned, and that's about technology and how it's meant to be an extension of our powers.
Yep.
And all of these things that you mentioned should, by definition, work in linguists' favor, in translators' favor. But there is this technology that translators don't really like a lot. Can you imagine what I'm talking about?
I absolutely can, but I also want to expand the circle a bit.
Yes.
So we, as a software company, we find ourselves in a funny situation because we basically work for 3 groups of people. One of them is the individual translators, the translation professionals. Another group is the translation companies, LSPs, as they are. That's one of the popular term, hated, and for some hated term that they use for these companies. And the end users of translations that we call enterprises, because there's a lot of companies that don't do translation as the main profile, but they realize they exist in a multicultural, multilingual global market, and in-source some of them or most of their translation efforts. And we have a lot of customers like that, and every similar the other companies, our dearest competitors, companies similar to us also do. So we say that basically what we create is meant to be used by language professionals, either working on the translated content directly or organizing the process, running the process, or getting involved in quality assurance. So these are basically the three kinds of professionals that are being used. But this doesn't mean that they are the only ones benefiting from it. Mm-hmm. Because we should never forget about the end users of translations and their preferences, especially as I don't think it's just me. I see the tendency of enterprises getting more and more aware of what localization technology can do for them. Mm-hmm. And that means that these technologies get integrated into various company processes deeper and deeper, which also means that one of the focal points of developing translation technology is getting it connected to whatever company systems there are, other workflows, other systems, sometimes seemingly completely unrelated systems. And the translation technology is meant to augment the powers of each and every one of them. And we also say, we also like to say that whoever uses our technology, we don't want them to simply be able to do their job. We want them to thrive. We want them to enjoy doing the job. And let's look at this in that context. So I guess you were talking about machine translation.
Yes.
And it's all about how it's being used. So I believe machine translation is, back at the time, 20 years ago, I myself wrote a rule-based machine translation engine. So it would be funny if I spoke out against it. But that was cheap. But still, I think machine translation can do beautiful things, and especially well-trained and well-prepared machine translation can do beautiful things and can be a lot of help. Obviously, it isn't useful in all cases, and we are kind of language professionals, and I count myself one of them. I spent years translating and reviewing, and I even did a PhD on that, so I think I can count myself as language professional here. We are coming to terms with the new realities of these being used. So I don't think we were late in memoQ in incorporating machine translation. We don't have our own machine translation provider. We don't want to deal with accumulating the data, curating the data, especially as there are many excellent providers out there. Some of them have really respectable and glamorous past. So some of them are decades old. And so we are coming to terms of how this can be used, and what I'm seeing right now is a learning process. And when you think of something, that's some people say that when you say we learn from something, it's an excuse for failure. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe that. Sometimes it maybe is, but when we say we are learning something, it also takes away the edge of having to succeed at the first go. Mm-hmm. Of having to feel good about it at the first go. And I can see how this could be difficult or unfamiliar or offensive to some of the professionals. But I think it's also essential that they use the technology and give feedback through the output they create, through the other channels they use, because that's the only way these technologies could develop. I don't see a future where machine translation would be eliminated from these translation processes.
Do you see the future where machine translation is the only thing we use to translate content?
No, I don't.
Why is that?
No, I don't. one of the beautiful things about translation is that there's a whole lot of information about the subject. Imagine you translate a manual about whatever, a piece of technology, about a camera, a lovely camera that you used to record this. And when you talk about a camera, there's always a whole lot of talk about how to use the camera to look at the reality that you want to capture. What I'm trying to say is that there is always a lot of reality outside the text, outside the actual communication that you need to translate. Mm-hmm. And that outside reality, that external reality doesn't exist for the machine translation system. What exists for the machine translation system is the previous translations and the neural connections created by processing these previous translations as training data. And because of this, what I believe is if there is no dramatic, what is happening today, I don't call it a paradigm shift. We know how it works. Even if we claim that neural network is a black box, we know what kind of black box it is. It's a mathematical construct. It's decades old, and we don't. That's not a paradigm shift. We still use previous data to create new translations. Mm-hmm. The paradigm shift would be a Babelfish. It would be a universal translator that you see in Star Trek, but not the kind of neural machine translation. And because it can translate more and more. Mm-hmm. So there's a volume that we translate. Most of it is actually translated by machine translation. It used to be the case because most translations aren't being done for publication or for any kind of official use or economic use. Most translations are created by machine translation because people simply want to understand a piece of text, a website, or whatever. And I sometimes click the translate button in LinkedIn, for instance, when I want to read a post written in Japanese. I don't speak Japanese, I'm sorry.
Sure.
So and whatever that produces for me is most of the time is good enough for me to understand the post. It never gets post edited. It never gets into a serious quality assurance system. Whatever. I never get the chance to give feedback about it. Mm-hmm. But there's always this margin between what the machine translation can do and what needs to be translated. And this margin, the gap has to be filled by humans.
And this gap will it somehow?
It won't widen.
I'm asking this question, but I'm kind of convinced that it will be getting smaller and smaller.
The proportion is getting smaller. The volume is getting larger.
Yeah.
So even though proportionally more and more things are machine translated, mm-hmm. human translators' work will still increase. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a paradox, but not if you think of the explosion that we see in content.
And that brings us to one other topic that we're covering so much ground, and maybe we should do like 5 different.
I know. I wrote a post about it, and I realized I should have, and that now it's getting some traction on LinkedIn, and I keep realizing that it should have been 3 posts, but whatever.
But let's talk about privacy now. And tell me something about it. The data we collect, how are things moving in the world, and how is memoQ as well treating data?
It's extremely difficult. It's difficult because there is no magic solution, magic remedy to and also our concept of privacy changes constantly. So, mm-hmm. and there's always a lot of gray zones, and depending on the data use. So, I think we are in the European Union, and the European Union has the single toughest privacy regulation in the world. It's called the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. And It's 100 pages, but on the other hand, it's one sentence. The one sentence, that's the main rule in GDPR, is that collecting and processing personal data is prohibited. And everything else in GDPR is an exception. Mm-hmm. So this is the approach, and when you're in business, you translate it into a behavior where you try to determine the minimum amount of data that you require to achieve a task. And that's called the obligation of data minimization. It's also mentioned in GDPR. Mm-hmm. And so basically, what we at memoQ follow is to collect as little data as possible. That's still enough for us to do our jobs for various purposes, and being transparent about what data we collect, what we do with them, and where we get them from. Because and that's basically, if the document where you answer these three questions is called the privacy policy. And well, if you are not in the habit of doing that, whenever you encounter a company that asks for your data, please do make sure that you read the privacy policy.
Isn't it difficult today? Because every privacy policy tends to be like,
but they are always all the same, and you can and from the language you can decide how honest it is, for instance. Mm-hmm. Because obviously, and that's one of the things that Kate Crawford points out in the Atlas of AI, that some privacy policies, some companies that are supposed to be disclosing their approach to data processing don't tell the entire truth, and do stuff with your data that they are not telling you about. Mm-hmm. And that's, as a business, that's the first thing that you shouldn't be doing. So that's, and when it becomes tricky is when you're a cloud provider, and we are one of those. We have how many corporate clients? A little short of 1,500 corporate clients on the cloud, and that means that you run an infrastructure that your customers trust to put their data on, data they collected. So that's a multifaceted problem, because we are hosting and, for all intents and purposes, taking responsibility for data that were not collected by us and over which we have no control. That's one side to this. So what happens if my customer collects sensitive personal data and doesn't tell me, and it leaks out because our cloud infrastructure is capable of fulfilling a really high security standard, but it's not military grade security. And we have customers who require military grade security, and they go with an on-premises solution because there's no cloud infrastructure that they can trust with the data. Mm-hmm. And the good thing about memoQ is that it can provide for both. If you want to stay in the cloud, you stay in the cloud. But if you are concerned with safety and you require a level of safety that you cannot trust the cloud, then you can go for on-premise.
But that doesn't mean that the level of safety is low. It's just the level
no,
of
it doesn't mean. No,
it's very high, but maybe not
real
military
security.
grade. Yes.
Security is really high, but I'm talking about military grade security, which you don't. It's not that you don't shoot for that, because information security is always a trade-off with everyone, because you can lock something down completely, but then it becomes unusable. Mm-hmm. Or you can allow people to do things to it, but that means whenever there's a permission to access data, even for one person, a vulnerability is already created. It cannot be helped. Mm-hmm. So information security is always a trade-off between these two, and you don't have to be military grade most of the time. It's enough that when you're good enough, that you provide reasonably expected protections, such as data encryption of sufficiently high level, access control, multi-factor authentication. One of couple of years ago, the big thing for memoQ was to enable it to connect to third-party authentication providers, so that we don't have to develop our own multi-factor authentication, but we can trust Microsoft Active Directory or an open standards-based authentication providers with that. It's one of the examples that, so there's always an interplay between the user of the cloud technology and the provider of the cloud space, if you will, because much depends on how the infrastructure provider protects the data and how they do about it. For instance, how do we make sure that the data used and uploaded and used by two different customers don't get mixed up? That's called data separation, for instance. And much depends on the user, the customer, that they comply with the regulations of their territory, their field, whatever, and don't put us in the precarious situation of having to investigate because of their behavior. Because our default operating mode is that we don't have access to and we don't look at the data our customers upload and use there. It's none of our business. So we only do that if like a court comes to us and says that okay, you need to look at this user because they are doing something unlawful. Luckily, nothing like that happened so far. So
excellent. Think you, Balázs. I mean, we printed out these questions here, and I think we haven't actually even covered most of it. Yeah. But we're not going to go through all of it. The last thing I want to ask you, and it's a leisurely question. We spoke a lot about AI, about machines, and we didn't even touch the supercomputers. But do you have a favorite sci-fi movie?
Favorite sci-fi movie?
Something like...
Tricky, because I love a lot of sci-fi movies, but I never think in terms of favorites.
Okay, but which ones do you like a lot, let's say?
From the early days, one of my favorites is the Andromeda Strain. That deals with the alien biohazard.
All right.
Actually, Alien is not one of my favorite movies, but that's... there was another movie that was pulled from the theaters and was only shown on Netflix called Annihilation.
All right.
So it's a
new movie, or
no? It's like 5 years old, something like that, or even more. You can find it on Netflix.
Okay.
So it's a great one, and there's a lot of good sci-fi, and also watching a couple of series. Obviously, everybody's. My motivation to learn German comes from the series Dark.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it does.
I watched it.
I watched it in German.
Yeah, me too.
But I don't speak German.
Me neither. True, but it has a great atmosphere.
Yep.
It's a really great
atmosphere.
Yeah,
it really does. So it's a funny thing, and I could name a lot more, but yeah, I don't think in terms of favorites. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Balázs, thank you so much for
these
insights.
Thank you. And I think, I don't know what you think about this, but at some point we should have a follow-up to this.
I think so too.
Because that was like everything, anything and everything.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
We'll
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining memoQ Talks, where we talked with industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned to gain new insights about what works best across all areas of localization. Join us next time on memoQ Talks.